Action. Whenever I was asked to give this talk, I thought about the word action, and I thought, what does that sum up in my brain? And it made me think of terms like action hero, action stations, action figure, action movie. And it occurred to me that within the term action is this idea of conflict and resolution. Action is used to overcome obstacles and to kind of reinstate some kind of equilibrium in the universe. But how does that apply to what we do as creative people? It's okay if when you're a superhero, but how does that apply to a photographer or a filmmaker or an illustrator? So that's led me to my first theme for today, which is the fight against procrastination, apathy and entropy, or how getting off your ass to make things happen is better than sitting on your ass waiting for things to happen. It sounds kind of obvious, but it's actually quite difficult to do in practice. In this book by Paul Dolan, Happiness by Design, he's a statistician and an economist, and he's come up with this idea relatively recently, which sounds kind of weird, is the fact that happiness equals pleasure plus purpose. And I think what he means by that is that you could spend a weekend watching Breaking Bad and eating lots of cake, and that will be filled with lots of pleasure, but not much purpose. On the other hand, you could spend your weekend helping a friend to move house and carrying lots of heavy boxes around, which doesn't have a lot of pleasure, it does have quite a lot of purpose. So to achieve happiness, you kind of have to find this balance between the pleasure and the purpose. And it's the purpose side of things that I suppose I'm going to be talking about today, the kind of things that you can do within your career that maybe help to expand your comfort zone a little bit and to give you greater skills over time. To put this in context, I created a kind of a timeline of my life, which is kind of a slightly sobering activity to do. I'm not quite sure I quite like it or not. But, childhood in Northern Ireland, did my degree in the University of Ulster, got my first job as an illustrator in Belfast, and then fell into a job as a copywriter for an ad agency in Belfast. 1997, moved to Edinburgh, and I worked for about 10 years as head of copy at an advertising agency. Which is all fine, it was all great, but there was a lot of pleasure involved, but it started to get to the point round about here where I kind of felt it was lacking a little bit in purpose. And I thought maybe there were some other things that I would like to investigate. So I took a 3-month sabbatical in Australia because I never got a chance to do my gap year back at this point. So at the grand old age of 30-something, I went off to Australia for 3 months, and the day I got back, I handed in my notice and decided that I was going to go off and become self-employed. That was about 10 years ago. And in that time, being self-employed and being freelance gives you a lot more opportunities to learn different skills and branch out into different kinds of activities that might not be available to you if you're in a sort of job role. So as well as doing copywriting, I'm able to offer a whole range of services now, from illustration to animation, photography, storyboards. And I'm working in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Belfast, London and Amsterdam. These are just some examples of my illustrations that I work on. I could show you some of my copywriting work, but to be honest, nobody wants to really look at brochures and annual reports. And I think that pretty pictures tend to tell a nicer story. These have been created using a mix of Photoshop and a 3D modeling program called Cinema 4D that some of you might be familiar with. Some of them are static images, some of them are animations used online for corporate clients and so forth. I've also got various different styles that I illustrate in, such as a sort of more flat graphic style, such as this project I did for the National Galleries of Scotland. I do sort of retro, kind of looking branded kind of things, things for coffee shops, things for travel companies, golf courses. This is a sort of pastiche of a sort of old railway style posters that you got in the 1930s and 1940s. Pastiche of sort of 1960s kind of things, sort of inspired by the work of people like Saul Bass. Screen printy things, things for record labels, things for coffee shops. Nice cartoony things that are used for various different purposes, such as I got commissioned last year to do 52 different illustrations, one for each week of the year, for the Scottish Government's Greener Scotland initiative, which is a nice thing to be involved with, helping people to sort of think a little bit more about their impact on the environment and so forth. Figurative things, more things for record labels and bands, fine arty kind of things. Branding, infographics, which is something I really enjoy. You're given a bunch of statistics and then you have to go off and create a nice image that kind of sells what these numbers mean. This is for the BBC. Images for ScotRail. I call these storytelling images because they've maybe got a little bit of a hidden kind of motif within them that are used for sort of corporate clients. This was for a legal company. And this was some work that I did for the Edinburgh Winter Festivals a few years ago, which was a lovely thing to be involved with, least of which was because it was plastered all over Princes Street Gardens, which is always nice to see. And an image of the Scott Monument taking off. I was looking at this image the other night and I just remembered how it really was a labour of love, because I had to draw all these different people and they've all got slightly different expressions on their faces, and if you zoom right in on it, you can see things like there's two pandas in here from Edinburgh Zoo, and you've got a guy and a piper up here and a Scotty dog and a rock guitarist and Santa and stuff. So there's a lot of work went into that one. And as I said, I still do quite a lot of copywriting work, but I'm probably not going to cover too much on that in my talk today. The second theme that I'm going to be talking about is action and reward, or how financial reward can sometimes be the least important reward. And as creative people, we all have to earn a living. Sometimes it can be difficult. But one of the things that's sometimes quite interesting is to step back and think about your relationship with the financial side of your business. In this book by Malcolm Gladwell, he puts across the idea that you would assume naturally that if you draw a graph of income against happiness, that it's going to look like this. And the more money you have, the happier you get. But in reality, it actually looks more like this. There is a sweet spot at $76,000 a year where you're never going to be any happier than that. And I would probably argue you could be happier than a lot less than that as well. And I suppose once you get over the top of the curve, it becomes harder to earn money, which may impact on your happiness. So once you realise that, you think, well, maybe there's an opportunity then to do more things that don't necessarily have financial reward, but have other kinds of creative rewards. There's also this term, which I don't fully understand, but I think I get the gist of it, called opportunity cost, which is the idea that if you spend an hour playing a PlayStation game, that has a value attached to it, because that's an hour that you could spend learning a new skill, working on a new piece of artwork, a film script, or coming to a networking event like this morning. Or you could make the decision that playing a PlayStation game is actually the most valuable way to spend that hour. But I think when you become freelance and you're self-employed, these kind of things are naturally very front of your mind. You kind of consider what every hour of your working day is worth. And I think the traditional model was that time equals money, but I would argue that these days time equals reward. So you might do something that doesn't necessarily have a financial value, but has other rewards. About 10, 15 years ago, my working life probably looked like this, where there were things I do at work and the things I like to do outside work, and there's a little bit of overlap in the middle. Since I've become freelance, I've been able to merge these two things much more closely, so a lot of the stuff I'm doing in working hours actually feels much more like fun. And this doesn't necessarily even apply to creative things. It could also mean simple things like riding a bicycle. It's something that I like to do at weekends. But if I have an opportunity to go to a meeting, then I jump on my bike, and that means I'm doing a weekend activity during the week, so there's an opportunity cost there. As an example of some of the things that I do which don't have a financial reward attached to them, the last 3 years I've entered a competition run by the London Transport Museum and the Association of Illustrators. And in each 3 years I've had my work shortlisted, which has been exhibited in the museum in Covent Garden, which is quite a buzz. I don't get paid for this. It actually costs me money to send the artwork down to London, but at the same time it's a really nice PR thing, and it's lovely to be involved with such a high-profile brand that also has a wonderful history of supporting illustration since the 1900s. Equally, I've got a sort of funny fascination with architecture from the late 20th century, the good, the bad and the ugly, so you might recognise these tower blocks from Leith. And a few years ago I created, in my spare time, a series of prints that celebrate some of these buildings. Like this is a fire station in Dalkeith that I just think is amazing, but most people would think it's an eyesore. But I think there's a certain beauty in these things. So I created these bits of artwork, and then one of my clients saw the artwork and said, well, actually we've got a construction company in London that are building a new development. Would you be able to produce an illustration in the same style? So something that starts off as something that doesn't have financial reward can end up having some financial reward over time. I'm also a huge fan of the work of Alfred Hitchcock, and a few years ago I was mucking around with some 3D modelling software, and I decided to create this image which kind of was a pastiche of some of the film posters that Alfred Hitchcock worked on with Saul Bass back in the 60s, but brought up to date by using the 3D modelling style. Within the image there are 10 hidden references to 10 different Hitchcock films, which is a little bit like the way that Hitchcock used to make a cameo in his films, and you can kind of spot when he appeared. So we did this again as a free exercise, purely just as something to get out of my head and down onto paper. But at the end of it I was able to send it on to Empire magazine, who used it as a competition, and also it got picked up by Graphis, and it was nominated for an award in the Graphis Poster Annual. My third theme is about expanding your comfort zone, or how undertaking challenging things that subsequently become everyday things. Again, probably about 10-15 years ago, if this was my comfort zone, these things were all outside of my comfort zone. Things like working outside of the UK, using 3D software, being self-employed, even things like costing and invoicing were things that would have given me the jitters. But over time, you do these things, they become everyday, and your comfort zone expands, and your life is all the more rewarding for it. To go off on a slight tangent, I've mentioned in the last slide about some of the work that I do outside of the UK, and there's a company in the Netherlands that I do a lot of copywriting work with, who are a branding agency. One of the lovely things about being a copywriter is that you get to pick up on lots and lots of silly trivia over time, because they have clients that are cocoa manufacturers, or they make hybrid wheat, for example. So, for example, you would learn that the word chocolate derives from a Mexican phrase for bitter water, or that you have male and female types of wheat that actually have a form of intercourse in a wheat field, or that if you can infect one particular ant with the right type of pesticide, it can actually destroy an entire ant colony of 50,000 ants. So it's a bit like watching QI with Stephen Fry. You kind of end up sort of picking up all these silly little bits of information. You become a mine of useless information over time. But I've gone off on a tangent a bit. To go back to moving yourself outside your comfort zone, a couple of years ago I decided to get involved in making a short film. And it started off really as a software test where I wanted to see if I could create a model of a UFO. And I thought, I wonder what that would look like if I superimposed it on top of Edinburgh skyline. And I thought, well, what happens if I animated that and put it on top of some camera phone footage? And when I did the camera phone footage, I thought, oh, that looks like it's almost like a news report. So I cobbled together a lot of these little camera phone segments into a fake news report, complete with vox pops and man in the street interviews. And we put this on a fake news website called scottnews.tv. We did it as an April Fool. Now, to be honest, the results of the April Fool were pretty lackluster. I think we made about 500 hits. But later in the year, we found out that the film festival was running a short film challenge, so we expanded the story of the April Fool into a mockumentary, which is a kind of a comedy thing where we make fun of the fact that the April Fool wasn't as successful as we thought it was going to be. And we were very lucky to win Best Film that year. And because I was moved out of my comfort zone into this area where I was now making films, it meant I could go to some of my existing clients and start making films for them. So last year I made a film for the John Muir Trust, who do some really worthwhile work, and it was really rewarding to be involved with them and help them raise some money for a worthwhile cause. This year I wasn't going to bother entering the film festival because I thought, well, I won last year, so I don't want to tempt fate by, it'd be better to quit while you're ahead. But I teamed up with a musician and we came up with a new idea for a film, and we decided to make a slightly more artistic film this year. This is one of my friends. He's a copywriter. He was the main star of the film. He's well out of his comfort zone there. He'd never acted before in his life, but he did a great job. And this year we were lucky enough, as Alex mentioned, to find out that we won Best Film again, which was a really good place. And then you can see me grinning like a Cheshire cat. You might recognise Simon Bird at the entries from The In-Betweeners. He's one of the judges for this year's competition. I'm not going to show you the videos, but you can find them on VIMEO if you search Bill Walsh April Fool and Bill Walsh Sunrise. The fourth theme I'm going to talk about today is the creative butterfly effect, or how insignificant actions today can have significant consequences tomorrow. This is a lovely story. I'm not even 100% sure if it's true or not, but I'm going to tell you it anyway. On the space shuttle, you've got these two solid rocket boosters on either side, and they're manufactured in Utah in the United States. And they have to transport them from Utah to Florida, where the launch pad is. And they were transported by train. So the size of the solid rocket booster was defined by the gauge of the railway, which is 4 feet 8.5 inches. It's 4 feet 8.5 inches because it's based on the European gauge. The European gauge is that size because the original people who made the railways back 150 years ago were wagon makers. And the wagon makers had their tools set for that gauge because long distance roads in Britain were originally designed by Roman imperial engineers who set their gauge at that size because that was the size of a Roman chariot. The Roman chariot was that size because that's the average size of 2 horses. So the space shuttle is that size and shape because of 2 Roman horses. And I love that story. And it's just to prove the point, small actions over here can have much bigger consequences over here. About 10 years ago, I did a really, really stupid thing, and I did an acoustic solo gig at a pub in Edinburgh, and it was well outside my comfort zone. It still remains well outside my comfort zone. It was a horrible experience for both me and the audience, and it was dreadful. But because I pushed myself out of my comfort zone to do it, I met some really interesting musicians at that gig, and we had a lot in common, and they were lucky enough to get signed to a record deal. And whenever they took their first album out on the road, they phoned me up and said, would I like to come along as a session musician? So I got to drive around Europe in the back of a van and stay in horrible hotels and play some really interesting venues and be a pseudo rock star in my late 30s, which is a lot of fun, and play medieval piazzas in Tuscany, which is tremendous, and meet some really interesting people. And I suppose the point I'm making, sorry that was a bit self-indulgent, but you don't get these opportunities that way. It reminded me of a piece of advice I was once given, which is that if you're faced with something that's going to push you out of your comfort zone, you've got 3 options. You either don't do it, and then you might end up regretting that. You do it and things don't work out, but you still learn from that experience, so you've not really lost out. Or you do it and things work out okay. And really the only one that is the negative one is really this one. And a case in point is that a few years ago I came up with an idea, or a rough idea in my head for a children's storybook. And it's been on my list of things to do for about 3 years, and I thought, this is really going to get around to doing this. And I kept thinking, this idea's got a bit of merit to it, I think it could be a winner. And just this week I walked past Waterstones and someone else has written my book, and just my heart sank. So the advice I would give is don't put it off, do it today. Now, you might be sitting here beside a future creative collaborator or even Hollywood film star, as happened last month. So you never know how these little small actions can have big consequences further down the line. A few years ago I was lucky enough to get the commission to do the posters for the Edinburgh International Film Festival. And I did those in 2012 and also in 2014. It's a wonderful, wonderful project to be involved with, not least of all because you get to go along to some red carpet premieres and things like that, and your work is plastered all over the city for a couple of weeks. But this is a lovely sort of photograph that I really like. This is William Friedkin, who directed The Exorcist. And whenever he was directing The Exorcist, I was only 2 years old, and then here we are in 2012, and he's standing beside my artwork, and I suppose that's the creative butterfly effect. The final theme we're going to talk about today is the magic of turning imagination into reality, or how bringing your ideas to life can create a legacy. To sort of illustrate this point, if you read the book 2001: A Space Odyssey, on page 53 of that book is an interesting bit where Arthur C. Clarke describes what he calls a news pad, which is an item about this big that you can plug into a communication system on a spaceship, and it has lots and lots of news on it that are presented as postage stamp icons. And if you tap on one of these icons, it expands, and you can read the news article, and it goes away again. And this was written in 1968, and to be honest, it reads like an Apple text sheet. It's amazing because it's 40 years ahead of its day. And it's just wonderful to see how something that was in somebody's imagination then becomes something that has actually changed the world. So imagination plus action equals progress. Something that sparked my imagination a few years ago was that if you've ever walked along the Water of Leith path, you may or may not have noticed that there are these little, discreet little plaques about so big that are hidden along the way, all the way from the shore right up to Balerno. And blinking you'd miss them. They really are, because some of them are even hidden behind foliage, but they're beautiful little things, lovely little pieces of artwork. And the reason for them being there is that the idea is that you're supposed to walk the whole length of the journey. You make a crayon rubbing on a piece of paper, and when you collect all 10 of them, you win a medal. And I did this at the time when my son was about 4 years old, and we had a fantastic few weeks completing the trail. So when I moved to Musselburgh, which is about 7 miles outside Edinburgh, we moved there about 5 years ago, and there's a lovely path that follows the River Esk through the town, and we thought, well, maybe we could do something similar here. So I set about in my spare time coming up with this notion of a route that would follow the scenic riverside path through the town. And I designed what the plaques might look like. In each case they show a figure from history or something to do with the town's heritage, and they also show wildlife and bird life and so forth. And you'll notice as well that there's some words at the bottom. The idea is that as you collect each one, you reveal a sentence that then is a sort of a hidden secret message. And I created some Photoshop visuals to kind of show how these would work, and how the texture might work, and sort of what materials they might be made from, showed what the rubbings might look like. This is a Roman soldier because the Musselburgh has a Roman bridge. And I showed how maybe a website might help to sort of get people, enrich the experience as people walk along the route. And once people were able to unlock this secret code, they could go to the website and then download a certificate to say that they've completed the trail. Now I went along to the local council, naively kind of thinking that they would go, this is an amazing idea, here's lots of money, or we'll buy the idea from you, we'll go and make it happen. And they all received it very warmly and said, this is a great idea, but to be honest, it's going to be up to you to make it happen. We can give you half of the money, but it's up to you to get the other half of the money, and to basically go ahead and look into all kinds of things, from planning permission to manufacturing the plaques to all that kind of stuff. So I took a bit of a step back and said, right, this is going to be a slightly bigger project than I imagined. And again, I was thrown out of my comfort zone. I had to go around and knock on a few doors to try and get money out of people, which is something I wasn't very comfortable with. I went along to the biggest retailer in Musselburgh, which is a large supermarket chain, who make a lot of money out of the local population, and I asked them for some cash, and they said, we can give you a £20 gift voucher, which wasn't the answer I wanted. But we managed to get the money secured from some other much more generous people. And with a lot of projects, you'll find that once you get to a certain point, there's a tipping point where things start to build momentum, and there's enough people involved that things start to happen quite quickly. So I was able to commission some amazing photography for free from a guy called Matt Nansen, that some of you may know. We got the wonderful guys at Blonde Digital to create a website for free. I was able to work on the leafleting and sort of design some of the literature to promote the trail. I had to wait 3 very nervous weeks for the plaques to come back from the manufacturers, because I wasn't really quite sure what they were going to look like, or even if they would work, if you would be able to make a crayon rubbing from them. But they came back and I was delighted with them. They looked exactly as I imagined. They're made out of a resin material, because some of the Water of Leith plaques got stolen, unfortunately, because they're made out of brass. So we made this out of a material that has no sort of inherent value, sort of to deter theft. And then they were installed by the council at the end of May, and the response has been really good. We've gradually started to build momentum. We've got a Facebook site and a Twitter feed. So most weekends people are starting to share photographs and talk about the stories. And there's a lovely sort of community aspect to it, where older people are sharing their stories of what Musselburgh looked like in the old days, but you get little kids sharing photographs of their crayon rubbing. And you can find out more at the website, which is musselburghtrail.co.uk. So please, please, please go and take your families along and have a look at the trail. It really is a beautiful way to spend an afternoon, especially in the autumn. So to sum up, take action to create pleasure and purpose. Not all rewards are financial. Step outside of your comfort zone, delight in the butterfly effect, and turn your imagination into reality. I'm going to finish today with a reference to a book that I read earlier this year by a guy called Robert Aickman, which is he probably would come under the loose title of a ghost story writer, but there's a lot more to his writing than that. And there's a story that he'd written called The View, which is very, very strange and surreal and very weird, and I recommend that you spend a couple of hours reading it. Well, there's one point in it where Aickman puts across the idea that if you remove all the mundane and boring things from an average lifespan, and you just keep in the moments of importance and consequence, then you're left with 3 months and 17 days. So I suppose my message today is let's all make sure that our 3 months and 17 days count for something. And finally, I'll leave you with the words of George Harrison. He was once taking a walk with his wife in the gardens of their house, and there was a beautiful sunset where the sky was lit up with these orange clouds, and he turned to his wife and he simply pointed at the sunset and said, "That's what I want to do." And I think that's as good a way to finish today as any. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill. That was amazing. Well, we have time for a few questions. So while you gather your thoughts or questions, what was when you made that leap, what was maybe the thing that helped you get from, well, where you were to a successful freelancer? Like, was it people you met, or?
There's a lot of it to do with the people you met and the luck that you can make for yourself by the creative butterfly effect of, every time you meet somebody, you kind of think, right, they might be somebody that's worth sort of keeping in touch with. Another thing is just about a frame of mind. I think when you're in a salaried position in a company, sometimes you're kind of pigeonholed into one particular thing. And when I set up on my own, I suddenly realised I can do pretty much whatever I want, really, within reason. One of the reasons that my company is called Wind Design is because I've pretty much been winging it and flying by the seat of my pants since day one. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that. You've got to know your limitations, but at the same time, there's no harm in trying branching out into new things.
You don't know until you try, I suppose.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions for Bill? Jessica?
Yeah. Where you've got like a whole list of skills and experiences that you're now delivering. Obviously you've been building that up over time, but does anybody become confused about you being able to deliver all these various things?
Yeah.
And so well as well?
All the time. It's there are certain employers or clients that I've got who only know me as the copywriter guy, or only know me as the illustrator guy. And sometimes you will end up going into the same office and dealing with two different people and going, why is he to do an illustration brief? He's a copywriter, you've got that wrong. So it can confuse people, and it throws people out of their comfort zone a little bit. So some people are more than happy to work with you. I think it takes time to kind of prove that you might be able to look after, say, the art direction and the copywriting side of a particular job. And equally, I'm not good at everything. It's kind of one of those things where I'm more than happy to turn around to people and say, I'm not actually the guy for this job, but I know somebody that is. But you're right, it's people like to know someone for one particular thing. And equally with my illustration style, most illustrators that I know have a set style, which people will go to them because they're that style of illustration. With me, I tend to branch out and do all kinds of different things, which can cause a bit of confusion. And to be honest, it's something I struggled with because I kind of thought maybe I should have a set style, and then a few years ago I thought, nah. It's too much fun doing lots of different variety.
Has anyone else got a question?
When it came to working outside of the UK, how did you make that jump?
It was a friend that I'd worked with in the past who moved to the Netherlands, and she called me up and said, we've got some copywriting requirements, would you be interested in doing it? And then that company, things worked out well with them, so they were able to, they recommended my name to a few other companies in Amsterdam. So that's it. To be honest, I don't go out there that often. A lot of it is all done by email, which suits me fine. I've got two small kids, so it's nice to be at home and not be travelling too much for work. Although sometimes it's quite nice to get over there on a Friday night. Hi.
I'm an illustrator and character designer, and I just quit my job 2 weeks ago.
Good for you.
Because it was making me very unhappy, and I just wonder, how can I become like you?
Oh, that's good. Well, I think you've made the hardest decision. It's all easy from here on in.
All right.
It genuinely is. It's the hardest thing is to leave behind, the security of a salaried job. But if you said it's making you unhappy, then that's definitely time to move on. And it's a hard slog. You've got to go knock on lots of doors, but it builds momentum, and eventually, just concentrate on your work. Concentrate and don't worry about the financial side of it. Concentrate on just doing work that you're genuinely proud of and you're happy to do, and
eat.
that's optional. It's overrated. But yeah, you've made the hardest decision you've done. The hard part's over. So well done. Congratulations.
Well,
hi.
How do you broach? Obviously not now because you're well known. But when you were like this lady here just starting out, how did you get to that point of convincing the client to pay you a week's worth of hours to do the illustration as opposed to clip art down on the clip?
Yeah.
How did you find that mix of finding the clients?
It's a good question, because I suppose it was when I showed you the timeline graphic. I became self-employed in my mid-30s, which is about 10 years ago. And by that point, I built up enough contacts through my copywriting work that people knew me as someone that, maybe not necessarily as an illustrator, but as somebody that understood the machinations of the industry and how clients work and how realistic timescales and realistic costing expectations. So I suppose I had a little bit of a head start in that department. The other side of it was I still had to really prove myself as an illustrator, and that was pure and simply done by building up a portfolio in my spare time. The last year of my full-time position as a copywriter, I spent most of my free time working on illustration, folio work that was unpaid, and in the evenings and at the weekends, so that then I would have this folio that I could go out and say, this is what I do. And then over time, you kind of build up a bit of momentum. It does take time, but yeah. And there's always going to be people, as I mentioned before, that just know me as the copywriter guy, and other people that know me as the illustrator guy. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Clients who just don't see the value, like convince them?
Don't see the value in using illustration as opposed to clip art. It's interesting because I'm still involved sometimes with ad agencies where I'm being asked to come up with concepts, and somebody that you're working with or account handlers that you're working with might say, well, we'll just use a stock photo, or we'll just use a piece of clip art for this. And I said, well, I can then encourage them to say, look, for roughly the same price, I can do a bespoke illustration that no one else will have access to. It will be unique to this particular campaign. And once you educate them that way, then they'll think, okay, as long as you already do it. And there's no two ways about it, unfortunately, especially things like illustration that no one's ever going to become a millionaire as an illustrator, to be honest, unless you're very, very lucky. But it's not really the point, because the opportunity cost of sitting at home, because I use this side of my brain for illustration, it means that I can use this side of my brain for watching iPlayer, and so it doesn't feel like work. You'll be sitting at home and you can watch films while you're working and stuff. So there's an inherent value in doing this thing. So yeah, it's just a case of trying to convince clients and they can get something that's unique. Because we've all been in that situation where you've seen the same stock image used on 2 or 3 different campaigns in a particular year, and you think, oh, I know that stock shot, I've seen that one before. So the campaign loses value as a result. I don't know if that answers your question.
Sure. Over here. I'm interested in creative people's workspace design. I just wondered if you could describe whether you work from home or in a studio, what it looks like.
Yeah, it's funny because Alex gave me the password to the Instagram account, and I'll put a photograph up for you. But it's a very interesting question, because working from home is quite unusual, especially because I've got 2 young kids, and when my youngest came along, because I've got a boy and a girl, they've got to have a bedroom each now. And I think, well, I don't have anywhere to work, so you end up working out your bedroom sometimes and things like that, which isn't ideal. But we got some work done to the house earlier this year, so I've got a small but very nice studio space, which has got lots of nice Velux windows, so and you can just fill it the way you want. I just paint everything white, and it looks all nice and airy, and it's good for your brain. And yeah, it's enjoyable. It's not for everybody. I know a lot of people that struggle with working in isolation. And to be honest, I'm still doing quite a lot of in-house agency work, which means that I'm interacting with the real world and real people, which is good. But it's important to have a nice space that you can feel comfortable in for long periods of time when you're working late into the night on deadlines and so forth. But yeah, I'll share a photograph on Instagram and let you see what it looks like. Small, but I like it. And the important things are that it's got a DAB radio, I've got access to Spotify, a cup of tea. Anytime I go freelancing anywhere, you turn up with a laptop, as long as you've got Adobe Creative Suite on it, you're laughing. And the only 3 questions you always have to ask, no matter where you are, whether it's Amsterdam or Belfast or Glasgow, is what's the Wi-Fi code? Which generally takes about 4 hours to sort that out. Where's the kettle? Where's the toilet? And that's easy.
Great, on that note.